Welcome to my review for Resident Evil Damnation, which was the second animated Resi film. It is another standalone, so you don't necessarily have to have seen the previous one, Resident Evil Degeneration. There's only one returning character from the first film, Leon Kennedy. So first time around we had three main characters sharing equal billing. This time around Leon's the main man with a supporting cast beneath him. I was a little bit disappointed to learn that Claire wouldn't be coming back for this, Claire Redfield. She is my favourite Resi character, hands down. But it's not a deal breaker. Leon is more than capable of leading any Resi game or film with his gruff anti-hero personality. He does get shit done. And this time around, he's been sent to Russia. Actually, no, it's a small fictional country called the Eastern Slav Republic, which is either in Russia or just off to the side of it. I'm not sure who sends Leon on this mission. It could be the American government. It could be TerraSave, the mysterious company mentioned in Resident Evil Degeneration. I don't think I was paying attention enough at the start of this. It's curious that they've decided to make up a country for this film. I guess it could be that they didn't want to offend anybody in the real world. Also, I guess if they'd have used Russia, then it would have seemed a bit silly that a country that large couldn't just stomp all over a very small group of rebels in a small town. So Leon is sort of walking into a kind of civil war conflict in this film between a small group of rebels and a very small government. He's there in the first place because he's received some intel that BOWs are being used by this government, but what he discovers is that the rebels are using them as well. So he kind of sides with the rebels in order to get to the government because he can't just take on both sides. That'd be too much even for Leon. So all the way through the film, we've got this uneasy alliance between Leon and the rebels. He's constantly trying to change their ways in terms of not using BOWs, and it leads to a climax at the main government building where they presume all along the main stash of BOWs are going to be kept, and that's also where the main president is residing. It's a woman. I suspect she may have been in some Resi games that I've not played because she has all this scarring on her back, and I kind of got the impression from the dialogue in this film that this is not her first appearance in the Resi canon. Incidentally, on that note, it helps if you've played some of the Resi games coming into this. You can still watch it if you've not played them. I mean, you can just enjoy the action and the spectacle. Some of the references might go over your head, but it's certainly true that you will have a slightly richer experience if you've played a lot of the games. I'm kind of in the middle on that score. There were references in this film that I got. So, for example, BOW might confuse you if you've never played any Resi games. I know that it means biological organic weapon or something like that, but if you're not in the know, you could hear the words or the letters POW instead and get totally confused. So I felt a little bit smug when they started mentioning BOWs, but there were other times in the movie I didn't feel so cocky because there's a creature in this called the Last Plagueis, and I was scratching my head on that one. I certainly didn't recognise it when it was on the screen doing its thing. I think it might have been used in that Resi 4, 5 sort of era, and I was playing a little bit of catch-up with the Last Plagueis. Another interesting thing about this film is that there are no proper zombies. I'm talking about the really generic type of zombies, you know, that we see in like millions and millions of other movies. It's usually a great big fat comfort blanket at the start of any Resi game or film to have this type of easy zombie in there. You might only have a knife or a gun early on, but you can take out these things or just run around them, and then later on in the game you'll get the more difficult creatures, obviously. We don't get that in this film. We get the Last Plagueis kind of replacing them. You could argue that the Last Plagueis are the zombies themselves, just a higher level of zombies. But they are really a step up and more than a little frightening in confined spaces, like the corridors that the characters spend a lot of time in at the start of this film. They've got like tentacles coming out of their mouths really quickly, like those creatures in the dog pen of the film The Thing. And they do that open face thing where they can latch onto other humans. Come to think of it, I think the Last Plagueis might have sort of been in that film Resident Evil Afterlife, although it's very easy to forget that they did pop up in that. Lickers are in this film, and they are used in a very fascinating way. We first see a licker in this in a parking lot at the start of the story, As an aside, I've noticed that parking lots, underground parking lots, pop up a lot in Resident Evil games and films. So in this one, humans can control lickers, at least if they get infected by the Lost Plagueis, because there's sort of like a period of time before a human fully goes over to the side of being a Lost Plagueis that they're still human and they can control lickers, possibly other creatures as well. But this is an angle, an approach that I've not seen in anything Resident Evil before, and it's kind of made me think, wouldn't it be cool to do this in a game? Be able to control lickers. I guess it could make you a bit too overpowered, but it'd be nice to see it in a DLC at some point. I don't like the guy who controls the lickers in this, though. He's a bit of a dick, and at the end when Leon is having a little man-to-man with him and they're making friends properly now that the story's done, I couldn't really get into it. I was just thinking to myself, really, this guy's just been a complete twat to you all the way through the film. Don't make friends with him. His name's Buddy. Yeah, I just wasn't big on him. There's lots of lickers on screen at the same time in this film as well. Normally in the games, you never have more than 1 or 2 lickers on screen at the same time. I think in Resident Evil Apocalypse, the movie, there was 3 lickers in a church. But here we get 7, 9, 10. It's chaos at times, but it's good that Buddy is able to control the lickers because it sort of levels up the playing field at times when Leon and his friends are sort of in danger of getting overwhelmed. As well as Buddy, there's another guy called JD. Leon forms an alliance with him for a while, and I'm going into spoilers now if that bothers you. 3, 2, 1. JD dies after a point, but his personality, as endearing as it is, I'd kind of had enough of it by the halfway stage of this film, and I was sort of fine with the fact that he died, as bad as that sounds. But I think there should have been more rebels in this film. There's only about 3 of them. We're meant to believe that this rebel group is able to take on, a small government, but we only see about 3 of them floating around. I kind of feel like there should have been more rebels at the edge of the screen, more extras. And even in the case of the government, it feels like in the last third of the film, there should have been more government employees floating around on the edges of the screen, running out of the complex when the shit hits the fan, that kind of thing. I guess the conclusion to come to, the obvious one, is that because this is animation, they didn't have the money or the budget to spend loads of time drawing in these extra characters. But from watching Resident Evil Degeneration, I'm sure in the airport scenes in that, there were more characters on the edge of the screen. It felt like a more lively, bustling place. But watching Resident Evil Damnation, it sort of reminded me of playing Tomb Raider Angel of Darkness when Lara Croft is just walking through Paris and there's just no people because they just didn't have the technology on PS2 back then was that you couldn't really create a lively city. And I feel like we've gone back to that a little bit with this film, but I don't watch that many animated films, so maybe this is just something you have to tolerate a little bit with these kind of things, but it is noticeable. I did notice during this film that there's just way fewer people than there should have been in this Eastern Slav country. This film's biggest strength, though, is its ending. The last 30 minutes of this are gleefully fun. There are so many different things in the mix. We've got lickers, we've got the psychotic Buddy, Ada Wong's in there, we've got SWAT guys, a tyrant pops up out of the blue. That was a real surprise for me. I thought we were going to get the typical cheesy Resident Evil ending of Svetlana trapped in her office, suddenly thinking to herself, this isn't going well. I know, I'll stab myself with the T-virus and turn myself into some hideous creature which will allow me to overrun my enemies and therefore allow me to continue on with my life goals as intended. But no, we don't get that. We get a tyrant, and there was no tease for this thing in the movie up to this point, which was odd. I mean, in the first Resident Evil film that Paul W.S. Anderson did, Alice comes across the liquor or whatever the creature is in that film. She sees it in a glass cabinet, and that's our clue as to what's going to happen later. It's sort of the teaser for further on. Don't get that here. The tyrant just pops up out of a tube, and it's like, whoa, shit. I must confess, though, that again, my lack of Resident Evil knowledge came to the fore, because when I saw this thing, I thought, oh, that's surely a Mr. X, but without its hat on. It must be that same creature. Now, technically, I might have been right, I think, but I did some more reading online after I'd watched the film, and it turns out that the Mr. X creature and the Nemesis from Resident Evil 3 are actually the same thing, I think. Help me out here if you've got a lot of Resident Evil knowledge, but I think they're actually the same thing. They're both tyrants. They were just released into the wild at different stages of their development, so they look completely different. I could be wrong, but I think that's the gist. But I didn't know that during this film. I thought that this was a Mr. X creature, and I thought the Nemesis was something entirely different. I don't think we needed more than one of them, though. I mean, they are so overpowered. Even just having one of them, Leon and Buddy, would have had a really tough time escaping. There's a bit of a random moment where two tyrants are chasing Leon and Buddy, and then we cut to the president's office or somewhere else, and then we go back to the main action, and somehow there's now just one tyrant chasing Leon and Buddy, and the other one seems to have teleported to a completely different avenue, and it is coming at them from a different direction. That was a bit of a weird moment, but on the whole, I do like the third act of this film. I think it's more exciting than the ending of the previous one. But in all honesty, I can't actually make my mind up which of the two films I prefer. I think this second one is more creative, but I think the first one, I like the ensemble cast aspect to that. Having Claire in the mix, having Angela Miller in there, the characters in this film, I mean, it's basically Leon and then a load of rubbish after that, but certainly the action and the monsters in the second one are more satisfying. So I don't know, weighing both films up, it's very close for me right now. But in terms of this film, let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give it. So we've got 1, 2, 3 bloody axes out of 5. I think that was the same score as I gave Degeneration, or did I give Degeneration 2.5? Off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but certainly both films feel like a very similar quality to me. They are very watchable. I don't think they're amazing. They're not really going to convince non-Resident Evil fans to get into the series if they were to just happen to watch them, but I'm certainly enjoying plodding my way through them, and I will be back to review the third one very, very soon. Until next time, cheerio.